They buried him in cement, but he was still breathing. They thought he was dead when they rolled the drum into the pit. Heavy, sealed, silent. A perfect tomb. Poured the concrete like it was just another construction job. Fast, messy, and forgettable. The drum hit the bottom of the hole with a deep thud, like the earth groaned, like it knew. They covered it with cement and gravel, and then packed up before sundown, laughing like nothing had happened, like a man hadn't just begged for his life inside a metal coffin that would never open again. That was Thursday. By Friday, the entire crew had vanished, the job left unfinished, the cement still curing, but the man was still breathing. They never saw him coming. Nobody even knew his name at first. He was just the guy in the drum. No ID, no phone, no wallet. Just a half-broken wristwatch and a scar that ran from his ear down to his jaw like someone had tried to slit his throat and missed. The coroner who opened the investigation expected a corpse. What he found was something worse. Inside the 55-gallon drum, the man's fingernails were shredded, blood under each one, and scratch marks etched into the steel. Deep, desperate, angry, like he wasn't trying to escape, like he was trying to remember who did this to him, and that's where the story should have ended. But the real horror hadn't even begun. Rewind 4 days. Victor Salgado wasn't a saint, but he played one well. Construction foreman by day, cash runner by night, tied up with the kind of men who shook hands with politicians by morning and fed bodies to dogs by midnight. He knew where the bodies were buried. Hell, he'd buried most of them. But when he decided to leave it all behind, to run with the wrong bag and the wrong girl, he made one mistake. He told someone. Just one person. His best friend. His blood brother. Mateo Cortez. And that's when things started going wrong. The job was simple. One last run. Cash stacked in a duffel, a burner phone with one number, a safe house just outside Tucson, and a plane waiting on the tarmac. But the night before they were supposed to leave, someone leaked his location. The motel door was kicked open like paper. He never even got to reach for the gun. 3 men in ski masks. One with brass knuckles, one with a chain, one with a syringe. They didn't shoot him. They didn't stab him. They injected something, slow, paralyzing, something that melted his bones and turned his body to jelly while his brain stayed awake. Fully awake. They laughed while they loaded him into the trunk. They laughed while they argued about who would get paid more for killing him slow. They laughed when they rolled him into the drum like trash, when one of them said, "It's like he's watching us." Creepy bastard. And they kept laughing when they poured the cement over his face, but Victor didn't die. He just went silent. And in that silence, buried under cement and steel, his body broken, lungs gasping through slivers of air trapped in pockets between the layers, something else took over. Not survival, not panic, something colder, angrier, a vow. He didn't know how long he had. Maybe minutes, maybe hours, but he wasn't going to die screaming. He was going to remember every voice, every word, every scar, and when, if he got out, he wasn't going to run. He was going to find them. Because the worst part wasn't that he had been betrayed. It wasn't that his face was bruised or his ribs shattered or his leg bent at a sick angle. The worst part was knowing who ordered it. Mateo, his brother. The man who had pulled him out of a gutter at 16. The man who had held his mother's hand at her funeral. The man who had once taken a bullet for him. That same man had set him up, sold him out, and left him to die. And Victor couldn't figure out why. The first miracle was that a neighbor heard the noise. Not the screaming. There was none. Just the odd echo of metal, a faint clanging from the construction site that should have been silent at midnight. She called it in thinking it was a raccoon. The cops didn't even bother showing up until the morning. By then, the sun had baked the drum like an oven. They cracked it open as a joke. What they found wasn't funny. The man inside wasn't dead. Not yet. Eyes swollen shut, lips gray, barely a pulse. They thought it was a prank. They thought he'd been dumped post-mortem. Until he blinked. One twitch. That's all it took. News vans were there by sundown. Cement tomb miracle. The man who wouldn't die. Doctors said he wouldn't last a day. He lasted 6. When he woke up, he couldn't speak. But he could write. Barely. Shaky letters. Just one name. Mateo. And that's when things really started unraveling. The cops wanted a statement. The doctors wanted a psychological evaluation. The press wanted a miracle. But Victor wanted something else. And as soon as the tubes were pulled from his throat and the painkillers started wearing off, he made one request. No protection, no security, just one thing. Paper and pen. And from that moment on, everything changed. Names started to appear. First names, then addresses, then aliases, hidden accounts, dirty cops. 2 warehouses burned to the ground within a week. 2 of the 3 men who had buried him were found strangled in their own homes, their mouths stuffed with cement. No one could prove it. Victor had been under guard in a hospital room the whole time. Except he hadn't. He had vanished on day 8. And now the story begins. The hospital bed was still warm when the nurse walked in. Tubes cut, wires unplugged. The 4th stand tipped over like a storm had blown through. No broken windows, no forced entry. But Victor Salgado was gone. Gone like smoke. Gone like a man with nothing left to lose and only one thing left to do. The security guard outside the door never even noticed. The footage? Corrupted. The cameras? Blinking black from 3:17 to 3:21 a.m. Just enough time to disappear. They said he could barely walk. They said he had 3 cracked ribs and a fractured tibia. They said he'd never stand again. They were wrong. He didn't need legs. He needed rage, and rage has its own way of moving. The first body dropped 3 days later. Ricardo Rick Mendez, 34, former corrections officer, known enforcer for a cartel front disguised as a concrete company. Found face down in his pool with his teeth smashed in and a chunk of hardened cement jammed down his throat. Cops ruled it gang retaliation. They always do. But Victor's name never came up. No prints, no signs of entry. The cameras were cut again. Same window, 3 to 4 minutes of static. Like a ghost had walked in and whispered death into his ear. The second one took longer. Victor was methodical now, calculated. The pain in his body had fused into a single focus. Make them feel it. Not just die, feel it. Feel the terror, the regret, the knowing. The same helpless cold he felt as the cement hardened over his chest, inch by inch, while his lungs screamed under the weight. So he waited. Followed. Learned their routines. Ate ramen out of vending machines and changed his bandages in public restrooms, leaving behind clumps of dried blood and painkillers crushed into dust. A man rebuilding himself from the inside out. Then he found Diego, the chain guy. Flashy, loud, always in some bar, playing tough with girls half his age and pockets full of cartel cash. He liked to joke, liked to brag. And one night, drunk out of his mind at a strip club in Tempe, he said something no one was supposed to hear. "You ever see a man breathe through concrete? Creepiest thing ever." He laughed. And 2 nights later, he was found in the trunk of his own Cadillac, eyes gouged out, cement poured into the sockets. Still warm, still wet, still setting. Message received. The city went silent after that. Cartel lieutenants started checking under their cars. Judges hired extra security. Detectives whispered in hallways that a ghost was hunting dirty men in high places. But only one man knew the truth, and he was waiting for his turn. Mateo Cortez, Victor's Judas. The man who knew every scar on his body, who once helped stitch up his leg after a botched job in Guadalajara, who once swore on his life they'd make it out together. Mateo didn't sleep much anymore. His eyes were bloodshot, his gun always tucked behind his waistband. He didn't go to the same places twice, didn't answer unknown numbers. His penthouse had cameras in every corner, alarms that buzzed if a fly landed too hard. But paranoia doesn't stop karma. It just delays it. Because Victor wasn't after just blood. He wanted truth. What he didn't know, what Mateo had never told anyone, was that the betrayal wasn't personal, not at first. It was insurance. Victor had gotten sloppy. The cartel thought he'd flip, thought he'd trade names to save his girl, Rosa. And Mateo? Mateo had been given a choice, deliver Victor or they'd deliver Rosa piece by piece. He chose the knife over the girl, because he thought Victor wouldn't survive. He thought the cement would finish the job, and when he got word Victor was still breathing, he started planning his own exit, but Victor was already watching. He had been to the house, had stood outside Mateo's window for 4 nights, watching him sleep with a gun under his pillow, watching him drink himself numb, watching him crumble from the inside. And on the 5th night, Victor left a note on his windshield. I saw your face when the cement hit. You smiled. Mateo nearly crashed the car trying to flee the city, but there's no outrunning guilt. It follows you, like cement in your lungs. The FBI got involved when the 3rd man disappeared. Miguel Reyes, the man with the syringe. He never made it to his next checkpoint. Instead, his body was found hanging in a warehouse outside of Nogales. No marks on the body, no bruises. Just one thing. A metal 4-needle sticking out of his neck with a note taped to his chest. I remember the cold. The feds called it a pattern. The cartel called it a declaration. But Victor called it justice. By now, the myth had grown. Online message boards whispered about the man in the cement. People made TikToks, podcasts, Reddit threads dissected every clue, but no one had his face, just blurry surveillance clips, a man in a hoodie with a limp, a ghost, a legend. But Victor wasn't hiding anymore. He was climbing. Every step took him closer to Mateo, and every night, Mateo felt it, like footsteps behind him that never made a sound. He stopped answering his phone, fired his maid, barricaded himself inside his penthouse with 3 locks and a shotgun. And that's when the lights started flickering. Power surges, static in the cameras. And one night, the elevator opened on the top floor. No one had pushed the button, but the cameras blinked out, exactly 3:17 a.m., just like before. When Mateo finally opened his eyes, his arms were tied, his mouth tasted metal, cement dust covered the floor, and Victor was standing over him with that same look, quiet, unreadable, cold, but not furious, not loud, just final. Why? Victor asked. And Mateo cried, I didn't want to. They had Rosa. Please, man. Victor didn't blink. They had who? And in that moment, Victor realized something that shattered every plan he had. Rosa was still alive. Everything he thought he knew was wrong. And the game had just changed. Victor froze. It was the first time he'd stopped moving since he clawed his way out of death. His fists didn't tighten, his jaw didn't clench. He just stood there, staring down at Mateo like the floor had disappeared and everything he thought was true had cracked wide open beneath him. Rosa. Her name didn't feel like a memory, it felt like a bruise, like a heartbeat he hadn't heard in months, but somehow still lived under his skin. You said Rosa? Victor's voice came out like smoke. Mateo nodded, blood running from his nose, mouth trembling like a child caught in a lie. They didn't kill her. That was the deal. They said if I gave you up, they'd let her go. That was the only reason I... But Victor was no longer listening. His mind was dragging him backward. Through fire, through blood, through the motel that burned after he disappeared, through the wreckage of what was supposed to be his escape. They'd told him Rosa died, said her body was found near the border, said she'd been used as leverage and then disposed of like trash. He believed it because there was nothing left to believe in. But now Now she was alive, or worse, alive somewhere. "Where is she?" Victor hissed. Mateo choked on the answer. I don't know. They moved her. After they took you, I tried to ask. I tried. Victor didn't hit him. He didn't scream. He just turned away. Mateo wasn't worth rage anymore. He was a broken cog in a rusted machine. The real enemy was still out there, and Rosa was the thread pulling the whole thing back together. He left Mateo tied to a chair with a phone duct taped to his hand. Victor walked out of that penthouse without looking back. An hour later, a call came in to the police. Anonymous. Address only. By the time they arrived, Mateo was alive but babbling nonsense. Cement powder in his mouth. Words scratched into his chest with a broken coat hanger. "You smiled." Victor was already halfway across the state. He didn't sleep that night, or the one after. Every hour felt like a countdown, except he didn't know when it would end or what it was counting to. All he had was a name, a memory, and a blood trail he'd carved through the desert just to get this far. But Rosa's name didn't just bring hope. It brought questions. Why lie about her death? Why keep her alive? What did they want from her? And what had she seen? He made a call. One of the few people left in his past who hadn't betrayed him, Ana Morales, a former cartel accountant who vanished after testifying in a federal case. She owed him her life. And when he showed up bleeding on her doorstep at 3 a.m., she didn't even ask why. She just opened the door. "I need to know who took her," he said. Anna's face turned to stone. "You mean Rosa?" Victor nodded. "They lied. She's still out there." Anna didn't speak for a long time. Then she poured him whiskey and sat down like she was about to tell a ghost story. "Victor, do you remember the name Esteban Calderon?" His spine stiffened. That name was supposed to be dead. Calderon had been a myth inside the cartel, a shadow with no face. They said he ran operations beneath operations, moved money for governments, not gangs, traded bodies for influence. The kind of man you don't look at twice because you're not supposed to know he exists. And if he did exist, he'd disappeared over a decade ago. "He's not gone," Anna said quietly. "He went private, built his own network. Not drugs, not weapons, people." Victor's eyes narrowed. "You mean trafficking?" Anna nodded. "But not what you think? Not girls in vans? This is different. High-value targets, leverage, people with secrets, families of turncoats, witnesses, and Rosa, she saw something, or someone, something she wasn't supposed to." Victor felt his chest cave in. "Where is she?" Anna didn't answer. She handed him a file. Inside were 4 photos, surveillance shots. Rosa at a clinic, Rosa in handcuffs, Rosa on a black site roster labeled Asset A17. And one final photo. Rosa behind glass, pale, eyes swollen, wearing a white jumpsuit with no shoes. In the corner of the room stood a man in a navy suit, his face blurred, but Victor recognized the watch. Platinum. One of a kind. Esteban Calderon. "She's not a prisoner," Anna whispered. "She's a message." Victor slammed the file shut. "I'm going to get her out." Anna caught his wrist. "Victor, listen to me. You think you've walked through hell, but this is something else. These people don't make noise. They erase it. You kill street dogs. You don't kill phantoms." Victor looked her in the eye. "I've already been erased once." She didn't argue after that. By dawn, Victor was on the road again, armed, ready. The GPS coordinates Anna gave him led deep into the desert, old mining country, fenced off with private security signs and no cellular signal. But Victor didn't need a signal. He needed her. The first guard went down before he even saw the blade. The second took a bullet to the leg and didn't get back up. Victor moved like death in motion, quiet, relentless, precise. This wasn't a rescue. This was resurrection. He reached the gate by 4:23 a.m. 2 watchtowers, 1 camera, 1 guard inside the main booth. Victor didn't hesitate. He set fire to the entrance. The panic lasted 12 minutes, and by the time they figured out it wasn't just a distraction, it was already too late. Victor was inside. What he found wasn't a prison, it was a lab. Clinical. Sterile. Soundproof walls. Rooms without windows. Faces behind glass like dolls lined up in rows. And in the 4th corridor he saw her. Rosa. Bruised. Awake. And staring back at him like she'd been expecting him all along. She didn't cry. She just whispered, "Took you long enough?" And then the alarms went off. The second the alarms hit, the air changed. Not louder, just heavier. Like the walls themselves knew what was about to happen. Victor didn't move at first. He just stared at her through the reinforced glass. At Rosa. Alive, breathing, and somehow exactly as he remembered, yet completely changed. Her eyes weren't wide with fear, not like someone begging to be saved, but steady. Like she'd known this moment would come eventually, like she'd been counting the days. His fist hit the release panel once, twice, a third time. Nothing. The system was on full lockdown. A synthetic voice crackled through the corridor in 3 languages, warning about a containment breach. Footsteps started pounding overhead, doors slammed shut one by one, and somewhere down the hallway, a bolt clicked into place like a guillotine setting its target. But Victor didn't care. He dropped his shoulder into the panel hard enough to crack the casing. Sparks burst. The glass buzzed. He hit it again, harder. Blood spilled from his knuckles. A third time. The door gave. Not all the way, just enough to wedge a crowbar through, and with one final roar, it buckled open like it had just lost the will to fight back. Rosa didn't run into his arms. She stood there, frozen, shoulders squared, eyes searching his like she was checking for something only she knew to look for. And when she finally moved, it wasn't a hug. It was a whisper. "They're watching." Victor pulled her behind him. "Let them." They ran. No map, no lights, just instinct, just noise. The hallway split in 3. Voices echoed from behind, boots slamming against the tile. Rosa grabbed his hand, pulled him left. "They built it like a maze, to confuse, to slow you down. But I've walked it every night in my head." They passed door after door, some with names, some just numbers, some locked, others not. Victor didn't ask questions, not yet. There would be time for answers, after the blood stopped ringing in his ears. Right now, there was only escape. The first guard came out of nowhere, turned the corner and raised his rifle without even hesitating. Rosa ducked. Victor tackled him into the wall so hard his helmet cracked. The gun clattered across the floor. Victor didn't take it. He took the man's ID badge and kept moving. Rosa snatched a pen off a desk like a blade, slid it into her sleeve like she'd done it 1,000 times. No hesitation, no stumbles. She wasn't just a prisoner, she was trained. Victor didn't ask how. They reached the sub-level doors, locked. Rosa slapped the badge. Access denied. Victor stared at the reader. "This guy high clearance?" Rosa nodded. But not that high. Victor turned and ran back to the downed guard, dragged his body like dead weight, slammed his hand onto the scanner. Nothing. Then he saw it. Thumbprint required, not just access. Authorization. Victor didn't blink. He grabbed the man's wrist, bent it, and drove his own blade clean into the base of the thumb, severed the tip and pressed it to the pad. Beep. Access granted. They dropped into the sub-level like ghosts slipping through cracks. The ceiling got lower, the walls more narrow, less glass, more concrete, old concrete, stained. Screws rusted, lights buzzing with age. This part wasn't on any blueprint. Victor felt it in his bones. What is this place? Rosa didn't look at him. Where they put the ones who talk too much. Behind them, voices were closing in. Not fast, not panicked, just methodical. These weren't security guards. These were cleaners, the kind that don't leave survivors. Rosa grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall. We go right, then up. There's a hatch above the east wing. Emergency evac. Evac for who? She looked at him. Them. And suddenly, Victor understood. This wasn't a prison. It was a bunker, meant to bury things deep, forever. Only a few ever came out. They moved fast. They passed a door with no label, just a symbol, a circle with a line through it. Rosa hesitated. Wait. Victor stopped. What? She turned back. That room, that's where they kept the files, the logs, everything. Victor's hand was on the door before she even finished. Inside was cold, not cold like air conditioning, cold like death. A wall of servers blinked quietly, untouched. In the corner, an old cabinet, analog. Victor ripped it open. Files, hundreds, real paper, no digital trace. He grabbed the folders marked a 17 and Asset Division, stuffed them into his jacket. Rosa was already pulling a drive from one of the towers. Let's go. But the hallway was no longer empty. 5 men stood between them and the exit. Suits, no insignia, no emotion. One of them raised a hand. Stop. Come with us. We won't shoot. Victor didn't believe him. Neither did Rosa. He threw the cabinet. They ran. Bullets followed. Rosa ducked left, kicked open a utility closet. Climb, ladder, tight, rusted. But it went up. Victor followed, ignoring the searing pain in his ribs, his shoulder screaming with every pull. Above them, the hatch. Locked. Now what? He gasped. Rosa pulled the pen from her sleeve. Not a pen, a charge. She stuck it to the latch, twisted the cap. 3 seconds. Boom! The hatch flew open, sunlight. The first sunlight Victor had felt in days. They pulled themselves into the desert wind just as the men below reached the ladder. Rosa didn't wait. She grabbed a flare from the emergency box and fired it into the sky. 1 shot. Red. A minute passed. Then 2. Then a roar. A black SUV tore across the ridge. Anna, behind the wheel. Doors opened before she even stopped. Victor shoved Rosa inside. Gunfire burst from the hatch as they pulled away. Rosa covered her ears. Victor didn't. He wanted to hear them scream, wanted to memorize the chaos. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. As they sped down the old mining road, Victor turned to Rosa. Why didn't you tell me, back then? About the files? About all of it? She looked at him. Tired. Empty. But calm. Because I didn't know who you'd become. And that was when Victor realized. Rosa hadn't been waiting to be rescued. She had been waiting for revenge. They stopped at a safe house buried so deep in the hills it didn't show up on satellite. Old mining office turned bunker, no internet, no power grid, just backup generators and dead silence. Rosa laid the files out across the table like pieces of a corpse. Each one told part of a horror story. Patients with no past, families blackmailed, threats exchanged for access, people stripped of names and labeled assets. The same words stamped over and over across the top of the files. Disposable. Victor didn't say a word. He knew those faces. One of them had served in his unit. Another had once helped bury a body in the Mojave. Some were just kids who got too close. Some were people who had trusted him. And now he was the last one standing. Rosa reached into her coat and pulled out a small audio recorder. She hit play, static. A pause. Then a voice. Asset A-17 has demonstrated increased resistance to interrogation. Recommend isolation, chemical suppression, and memory dampening. Subject remains high risk due to prior connection with subject V19, terminated as of Thursday. Victor's chest tightened. Terminated. That's what they called it. The cement, the drum, the coffin. He was a subject, not a man, not a threat, not even an enemy, a loose end. But loose ends can strangle. Anna burned the files one by one. No copies, no backups. Only the names they'd memorized. Only the map Rosa drew from memory, marking the next site. There were more like her, hidden, tagged, silenced. Victor knew then this wasn't about saving Rosa anymore. It was about all of them. That night, Rosa took a walk out behind the safe house. Victor followed, quiet. They stood under the stars, wrapped in wind and ash, and things they never got to say back when time still felt like it was theirs. "You know they'll come for us," she said. "I'm counting on it," Victor replied. She looked at him. "And after that?" He didn't answer. Because the truth was, there was no after. Not for men who had already died once, not for ghosts in the system. But there was something else. There was the fight. And maybe, just maybe, there was justice. The next morning, Victor made one final move. He walked into a private storage unit outside of El Paso. No cameras, no witnesses, just a vault he'd bought under a dead man's name. Inside was the drum, the one they'd found him in, still dented, still stained, still holding the scratches he'd carved while the concrete was still warm. He didn't keep it as a trophy. He kept it as a promise. And when he stepped out of that unit, he didn't take the drum with him. He rolled it down the hill into a quarry, let it sink in the dark where it belonged. He was done being buried. Now he was the one doing the digging, and the ones who thought they could seal him in steel and forget him, they were about to learn some ghosts don't haunt. They hunt, and just like that, another one for the books. But let me tell you something, nephew. If you think that was chilling, if you think this story ends here, oh no. The real darkness? It's still out there, somewhere in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. And we'll be the ones to bring it to light. So if you're still breathing after this one, like our boy Victor, don't just walk away. Hit that subscribe button, smash that like, drop a comment, and tell me, would you have forgiven Mateo or would you have buried him deeper? This is Uncle Luke, and I've got more stories where that came from. Don't blink. The next one's already watching you.